Let's say our La'asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher danu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, rule of the universe, who has made us sway with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. So, we start with a picture. This is a picture of date trees. It is a picture that I took near the city of Jericho a couple months ago. And I bring this picture for us to start a discussion about apples and honey because in the Bible, when it talks about honey, it usually talks about date trees, about date honey. And so this is where the picture, this is what it looks like. Over here, these clusters are the dates. And so this is the honey of the land of Israel when these dates get processed. And Jericho was originally a city for dates. The original Judean dates have been wiped out by the Crusaders. So there have been date pits that have been found on Masada, and those have been brought back to life by scientists. And I believe they've grown at new dates. But the Dagot Nor and blanking on the other Medjool dates, Dagot Nor being better for baking, Medjool being sweeter and a little bit, and some people prefer them for eating. But the original dates we do not generally have access to. Questions about this picture or the history of date trees in Israel?
What's in the front? What's in the front of them, David? Hay?
Brush.
Oh, okay.
This was taken on the road to the Dead Sea.
Okay.
Jericho is one of the oldest cities in the world, and it became such because it had access to water with the Jordan River, and it had access to land and good soil for growing dates so that other communities could trade with them, with the people who lived there, and get a sustenance that was very useful for living in the desert.
David, those dates look pretty big, and the branch above it almost looks like coconuts growing.
Really?
Yeah.
David?
Yes.
So where do the apples come from?
The apples.
America, of course.
Well, not back then.
Let's talk about the apples. All right, starting with the most famous apple. Ellen, will you read this? This is probably the only text that we'll have anybody read.
Now the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that Adonai had made. It said to the woman, "Did God really say, 'You shall not eat of any tree of the garden'?" The woman replied to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. It is only about fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, 'You shall not eat of it or touch it, lest you die.'" And the serpent said to the woman, "You are not going to die, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, who knows good and bad." When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked, and they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths.
All right, and
And something is missing.
yes, if you would read our context, please.
Context. This is from the biblical book of Genesis, when Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. You'll notice that there is no apple mentioned here. The rabbis of the Talmud have a discussion about what the fruit might be, suggesting grapes because wine brings trouble, wheat because eating grain is part of growing up, and figs because they use fig leaves immediately afterwards, and figs grow on the same tree as fig leaves. So where did the apple idea come from? Is the apple, I don't know if it's in here, is the apple even native to
Yes,
Israel?
it is native to the land of Israel.
Oh, okay. So where did the apple idea come from? In 1507, Albrecht Dürer painted Adam and Eve and depicted an apple. This is probably because at that time in Europe, there were very few fruits that they knew about. And also, the Latin word malum could mean bad or apple. Given that the literacy level in 1500s Europe was not high, people didn't read the Bible, but rather looked at the painting and said, oh, that's what Eve ate. The Adam's apple in the throat was assumed to be due to a piece of the apple that Adam supposedly ate.
Okay, so thank you, Alan. That was a lot of reading. Questions about the apple that isn't actually in the Bible?
Well, I just looked it up and it says the origin of apples are not native to North America. They originated in Kazakhstan in Central Asia, east of the Caspian Sea. So they had to be also imported to the land of Israel, even to the Garden of Eden, I would have thought.
Yes, that is true. The Garden of Eden, based off of the description of the rivers in it, is assumed to be in Mesopotamia, but that still requires a little bit of transplantation starting in Kazakhstan. Other questions? Thank you for finding that, Herb. Other questions?
The question about them being dates, I think, is rather questionable because they had to be eating something before they started eating that fruit. So wouldn't dates have been something they would have eaten from other sources?
Dates?
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that they ate dates. The rabbi suggested grapes or wheat or figs. But dates, they could have certainly eaten dates as a fruit native to that area of the world.
The real question I have is where do they learn to sew to put those fig leaves together?
Good question.
Necessity is the mother of invention. All right, let's go on to other apples. So most of the apples in the Bible appear in the Song of Songs. Song of Songs is a biblical book that is X-rated. It almost didn't make it into the Bible until it was argued that this was really an allegory for God's love for the Jewish people. So we have Song of Songs 2:3, like an apple tree amongst trees of the forest. So is my beloved amongst the youths. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my mouth. We have a variety, sustain me with raisin cakes, refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. A few other such quotes from Song of Songs that refer to apples. So this seems to be evidence that there were apples in the land of Israel by the time of the Bible. Questions about Song of Songs and apples?
But isn't the Song of Songs very late compared to creation?
Yes. It is said, it is traditionally ascribed to Solomon, which, if we go with that dating, would put it about the year 1000 BCE-ish, which is still the time of the Bible.
I'm curious what the biblical apple looked and tasted like.
Oh,
If it was anything close to what we have.
It's a fair question. I can investigate, although I'm going to guess that probably nobody has an answer, but it's a good wondering.
It's just, there are so many varieties,
That's true.
that it's probably far removed from what we know.
And
Yes.
none of them tell us the difference between good and evil.
Yes.
But isn't it knowledge and lack of knowledge not good and evil?
I am checking right now because it might be yes and. Let's see. Oh. Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. But as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it. So, as they say in the Talmud, El ve'el divrei Elohim chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. You're both right. Let's do some other apples. So, from the book of Joel. Joel is one of the minor prophets, and he is describing a locust infestation. And among the plants that are affected by the locusts that have come are the apple tree. And joy has dried up among the people. And then we have in Proverbs, which is the biblical book of sayings, like golden apples and silver showpieces is a phrase well turned. So we have these apples. Then we have tapuach, which is the Hebrew word for apple, as a name. So Tapuach is a descendant of Judah, and Tapuach's father is Hebron, or Chevron. And modern scholars assume that when there are names that are related in the Bible, they often indicate relationships between places or groups of people. As it turns out, we have Tapuach as a place name, near the which is near the modern Kfar Tapuach, Tapuach Village, Appleville, I guess. So in Joshua, we've got the king of Tapuach, and then a couple other references to Tapuach. And this Tapuach is on the border of the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, located near the town of Hebron. So we have this relationship playing out in the Bible.
Since they
Questions?
mentioned golden apple, are we to assume the apples were not red?
Good question.
Maybe, but it could also just be an apple that is made of gold. So it could be any apple that has been cast in the metal of gold. But it's a fair question. All right, there's also a different word for apple, ishon, and it comes in the phrase ishoneno, which is often translated as the apple of the eye. Now, it's referring to the pupil of one's eye, but because it does get translated as apple of the eye, I brought these references as well. We have from Deuteronomy, from Parshat Ha'azinu, God guarded them as the apple of God's eye. We have Zechariah, who is a minor prophet. Whoever touches you touches the apple of my eye. We have Psalms, guard me like the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings. Proverbs, keep my commandments and live, my teaching as the apple of your eye. Lamentations, cry aloud to the Lord, give yourself no respite, let not the apple of your eye cease. So we do have this use of the word apple as well, although it's more of an idiomatic usage. Questions about anything apple related before we move on to honey? I will point out that in the Song of Songs, apple trees are considered to be a place of love. And the Midrashim have a lot of fun with that, particularly when thinking about Passover and Cheroset. But that is a different holiday for a different time. All right, let's go into honey. So as previously mentioned, honey refers to date honey, not bee honey, unless it specifies otherwise. And although bees are not kosher, bee honey is kosher because the bees are thought to carry the honey, not for it to come from them, which, given the process, given the way that bees make honey, turns out to be correct, even though the rabbis didn't know it at the time. All right, so we begin with land flowing with milk and honey. Milk here being goat milk, not cow milk. And this phrase is all over the place. We have it in Exodus from the burning bush. God tells Moses, I've come to rescue them from the Egyptians and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey. Eretz Zavach Chalav Udvash. Still at the burning bush. God says it again. Before the Israelites leave Egypt, Moses tells them that when they come to the land flowing with milk and honey, that they should continue to eat matzah for 7 days. This is before they've left Egypt. After the golden calf incident in Exodus, God says to Moses that even though the Israelites are a stiff-necked people, that God promised their ancestors to bring them to a land of milk and honey, so therefore we're still doing this. In Leviticus, God says that because the previous inhabitants of the land of Israel did abhorrent things like child sacrifice, the Israelites get a chance to go to the land of milk and honey instead. And they shouldn't do those terrible things. In the spy story in Numbers, the spies say, yes, it does indeed flow with milk and honey. You're not just making it up, Moses. And then, same story, the two spies say, if God is pleased with us, God will bring us into the land flowing with milk and honey and give it to us. Book of Numbers, the story of the rebellion of Korach. Moses summons two of the ringleaders, Datan and Abiram, and they say, no, isn't it enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness? They are now applying this phrase to Egypt. And even if you do bring us to a land of milk and honey, we're still not coming. Deuteronomy now, the very verse before the Shema. Obey, O Israel, willingly and faithfully, that it may go well with you, that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. These verses are right next to each other in the Torah. A few verses before the second paragraph of the Shema, also in Deuteronomy, we again have a reference to God telling the Israelites' ancestors that the Israelites would come to a land flowing with milk and honey. When the Israelites bring their first fruits, this is a Shavuot reference, eventually, they recount their history, or they're told to recount their history in the book of Deuteronomy, and say that they're bringing these fruits to express their gratitude to God for having brought them to this place and giving us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And here we have a comment by the rabbis in the Sifrei that honey here refers to date honey. And Rashi also picks up on this, quoting the Sifrei, and says it's date honey. All right.
And figs. And figs.
Yes. And figs. Continuing on with Deuteronomy. Again, same monologue that the Israelite farmers have to say when they're giving their attitude of gratitude. They conclude with asking God to look down from heaven and bless God's people Israel and the soil that God has given us, a land flowing with milk and honey, as God swore to their ancestors. When the Israelites cross over the Jordan River, they are told in Deuteronomy that they should take really big stones and put plaster on them and then inscribe on them the rules that God has commanded them. There's a little bit of confusion amongst the commentator as to exactly which rules they're supposed to inscribe, but they're definitely supposed to inscribe something. And this is supposed to happen when they enter the land that God is giving them, a land flowing with milk and honey. From Moses' final speech to the Israelites, we read this, well, it was in the Parsha 2 days ago in Vayelech. Moses is quoting from God, when I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, that I have promised on oath to their fathers, and then they spurn me and break my covenant, and it goes on from there, but basically God is not happy. The phrase continues past Deuteronomy. So now we're in Joshua. And in Joshua, it talks about how those who were over the age of 20 when they left Egypt had been circumcised, but people younger than 20 had not been circumcised due to the challenges of schlepping through the desert. And so now when they have crossed into the land of Israel, now there's a mass bris. And this happens when they have come into the land flowing with milk and honey. Because the phrase Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash appears so often in Deuteronomy and also in Joshua, it is one reason why scholars think that the same author wrote down the history of Deuteronomy and the history in Joshua. It's a linguistic clue. In Jeremiah, again, we get this phrase. Here, God is saying, I made a covenant with the Jewish people at Mount Sinai that I would bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, and they would be, and I would be their God. And I've kept my part of the deal, and now they are worshiping other gods. So I feel like I am off the hook for my part of the deal. So look out, here come the Babylonians. Ezekiel, who is another major prophet, mostly writing in the land of Babylonia, talks about how relays a message from God to the Jewish community in Babylonia that God had promised to take them from the land of Egypt into a land flowing with milk and honey. And shortly later, Ezekiel is saying that after the Israelites spurned God in the wilderness, then God was not actually planning on taking them to the land of Israel after all, or the land flowing with milk and honey, but God had pity on their children. And finally, we conclude this section with a video. You can play it on your own, but I will sing the song for you, or the short version of it. The phrase a land flowing with milk and honey is Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. So the song that is most commonly used for this phrase is Eretz Zavat Chalav, Chalav Udvash, 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 Eretz Zavat Chalav, Zavat Chalav Udvash, Eretz Zavat Chalav, Zavat Chalav Udvash. It goes on from there. Back to the beginning. Also, there is a 1950s musical called Milk and Honey, set in the very new state of Israel. And so I brought a recording of this title song, Milk and Honey, for you, which is a reference to this phrase we've just been seeing over and over again. What questions are there about the phrase land flowing with milk and honey?
It's my understanding that Abraham, as far back as Abraham, including Abraham, these people were shepherds, and they had goats and they had sheep. So they would have had milk, plenty of milk, I would have thought. So why is the phrase milk and honey so attractive? If they already have the milk, why not just the honey?
Yeah, so the idea here is that the land of Israel has enough pasture that their animals will be able to feed well and give lots of milk. Abraham is in the land of Israel. Starting from Exodus, they are not in the land of Israel. That's probably why this phrase doesn't appear in Genesis. So everybody who's not in the land of Israel is being told, you will get to go to the land where there's plenty of grass for your animals, and then they will give you lots of milk.
But I know Abraham was told to go to the land that I will show you by God.
Right?
But didn't God also mention milk and honey to Abraham? I thought he did.
I will read through the Abraham stories and see if it's in there, and I will let everybody know. Other questions about about the combination of milk and honey in the Bible?
I have one question. I don't remember exactly where I read it from, but they say, that God takes honey from a rock.
Yes.
So that means he's not getting honey from a tree, he's getting it from a rock.
Yes, in those cases.
Okay.
That is a good connection. We'll come back to that.
Is the reference that you brought up before, where I forget who they were, but the grumblers who said we came from a land of Egypt, a land of milk and honey. Is that the only that you can think of? Is that the only biblical reference to Egypt, or ironically, perhaps to another land of milk and honey?
I believe so.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there's some innate knowledge they had that milk and carbohydrates were helping people sustain their life. I mean, that was a source of nutrition. And I don't, excuse me, I don't know, not necessarily in those words, but that they had some understanding that a plentifulness of milk and honey were life-sustaining and very relevant to their health and going forward, raising their kids. So if you didn't have it, then it wasn't, life wasn't good, couldn't be strong.
Yeah. That's true. All right, let's go on because we have more honey in the Bible. Okay, these were our videos. All right, so we have a variation on milk and honey. We have curds and honey. So in 2 Samuel, King David is being chased by his son Absalom. And when he and his loyal followers have reached a place of refuge, they are brought a number of foods, and amongst those foods we have honey and curds. So now we are in the land of Israel, and we have these things that are being brought to David, curds being a milk product. Then we have Isaiah. There are actually at least 2 Isaiahs in the book of Isaiah. This is the first one from the 700s BCE. And here, Isaiah is advising the king of Judah, who's concerned because the king of Israel and the king of Aram in modern-day Syria have ganged up on him. And Isaiah says, don't worry, it'll be fine. And look, we'll even give you a sign. There's a young woman who's pregnant, and she's going to give birth to a son. By the time that the son is able to reject the bad and choose the good, people will be feeding on curds and honey, even though right now there's a lot of troops tromping around and causing desolations. Incidentally, this is the verse that is cited for the virgin birth in Christianity, but that is a mistranslation of Betula versus Almanah in the Hebrew. And also, this is more than 700 years before Jesus. So it wouldn't be much comfort to the king of Judah to know that 700 years later, there will be a kid who will be born. So this is also not a reference to Jesus because of context. Then Isaiah goes on to say that the Assyrians are coming, and they will take care of your enemies for you. And then they're going to come to your kingdom. But they're not going to actually take over Jerusalem. They will, however, take away most of everybody's animals, but everybody will still have 1 or 2. And those animals that they have that are left, will give so much milk that everybody will be able to eat curds. So, and then people who are left will be able to have curds and honey. So again, this combination. All right, given the time and how much we have left, I'm going to keep plowing ahead. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. Samson. So Samson's in the book of Judges. He uses honey as a riddle, but is betrayed by his first Philistine wife. This is before Delilah. We haven't met her yet in chapter 14. So Samson comes back to marry this woman, and he finds a lion that he has killed, and inside of it, there is a swarm of bees and honey. So this would be bee honey this time. And he eats some of it, and he gives it to his parents, but doesn't tell them where it came from. And then he gives them a riddle. And then the Philistine, and he makes a deal with them of, like, they have to give him 30 outfits if they get it, if they don't know the answer, and he has to give them 30 outfits if they do find the answer. So then the Philistines tell his new wife, or tell the person he's going to marry that he's betrothed to, like, find out the answer for us. And she nags him and says, you don't love me, or you would tell me the answer. So finally he tells him the answer, and tells her the answer, and she tells everybody else. And then he has to give them 30 outfits of clothing, but he doesn't marry the wife. And she marries one of the people who was trying to get the answer from her instead. So that's Samson. Jonathan. Jonathan is Saul's son. And in the first book of Samuel, Saul declares a fast day, but Jonathan doesn't know about it because he's fighting. And then, well, he's with, and then he comes back and gets some more men, and they go out fighting again. Same day, he still doesn't know about the fasting. And there's some honey from a beehive. Honey is spilled on the ground, and everybody's really hungry. But nobody eats the honey because of the rule of Saul. But Jonathan doesn't know about this rule, so he takes a stick, puts it into the beehive, and then eats some of it, and he gets a lot of energy. And then he gets in trouble, and he's going to be put. Oh, and he tells everybody, you know, this is good stuff. Like, you should have some too. And they say, no, we're not going to. So then he gets in trouble for it. But he says, okay, so I didn't know, but the punishment is death. So fine, go ahead and kill me. And everybody's like, no, don't kill him, because he just single-handedly, like, chased away a whole encampment of Philistines. So then Jonathan does not get killed. So that's Jonathan and honey. Then we have honey from the rock, which you brought up earlier, Morris. So this comes up in next week's parsha, I think, where God says in Deuteronomy, or Moses says that God set them on top of the highlands to feast on the yield of the earth, nursing them with honey from the crag and oil from the flinty rock. And then in Psalm 81, which is also the Psalm for Thursday, God fed Israel the finest wheat. God sated you with honey from the rock. The commentators aren't quite sure what to do with this. They know honey doesn't come from rocks. Clearly, the rest of the time in the Bible, honey's not coming from rocks either. Ibn Ezra suggests that this might be a metaphor. For what? Also open to discussion. Then we get honey as a reference to things that are sweet. So Ezekiel gets told that he should eat some words, some writing of divine words, and he finds that it is as sweet as honey. In Psalm 19, which is part of Pesukei de Zimra, the judgments of the Lord are considered to be sweeter than honey, than the drippings of the comb. So this would be bee honey here. Psalm 119, God's word is considered sweeter than honey. Proverbs, pleasant words are like honeycomb, so bee honey, sweet to the palate and a cure for the body. This is part of the discussion about speech patterns of the wise person. Also from Proverbs, my son, eat honey, for it is good. Let its sweet drops be on your palate. And wisdom is similarly good for your soul and your future. That's in the next verse. All right, moving on to other instances of honey in the Bible. So now we get to Genesis. Jacob tells his sons, who need to go down to Egypt with Benjamin to redeem Simon from prison at the hands of Joseph, that they to take some of the choice products of the land in your
You're freezing up.
baggage, and one of them is honey. All right. Sorry about this.
Seems like you're frozen, David. Your internet isn't working. Can you hear us, David? Guess.
Earth to David.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it just went out.
Yeah. It's funny.
You need some milk and honey.
You need
Yes.
some honey.
Oh. We just lost him.
We lost him totally. David.
Maybe he'll come back on.
Hey, for David.
He'll probably try coming back on.
It said Alan is the host now, so Alan,
Aha, Alan, take.
I
what
am
are you
the
gonna
host.
do?
Does?
To what do I owe this honor?
I
You're the first reader.
merit, I'm sure, but it
Does that-
said it on the
does that-
screen.
Does
so
that
I
mean
just-
that I need to start talking quickly about apples and honey and stuff?
Mm.
Zoom
No,
has
just honey.
killed it on you, Alan.
Go, Alan, go.
So if it's interesting, I had to look up latinum. I didn't know.
And I did too, John.
Oh, really?
Star Trek, Star
I
Trek.
don't-
I also did.
Star
What
Trek.
I first
Okay.
came up with was
Why they-
laudanum.
David
We know
is
all
back.
that good stuff. Why would they
Opium.
give up opium? Yeah.
Well, so
But
that's
it's not
that's what I originally found. But then there's another page that mentions it as a spice, and they said in ancient times, ladanum was collected by combing the beards and thighs of goats and sheep that had grazed on the cistus shrub. And then they would sweep the shrub and collect the resin from it. And it was used as an ingredient for incense and medicinally to treat colds and coughs, menstrual problems, and rheumatism.
Sounds so Talmudic, doesn't it?
My God.
Combing
It is stuff in the
David
Talmud.
back.
Take this, take that for this disease, and that's so Talmudic. Gee.
David
right,
is
can you
back.
guys
I
hear me?
think.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, I apologize about that. A sweet
Welcome
new year
back.
for me, I think, will be a year without technology problems.
Yeah.
All right,
April.
so I'm not going to screen share. I'm just going to read off of the source sheet, and then I will send it to everybody. All right, so after the next incidence of honey is manna. In the Exodus, manna is described as tasting like wafers in the honey. In Leviticus, we are told that the meal offering should not be made with leaven because no leaven or honey may be turned into smoke as an offering by fire to God. So try not to burn your honey if you are cooking with it for Rosh Hashanah.
Vayikra bait, yes.
Yes. Deuteronomy, we got the 7 species of the land of Israel, and one of them is honey, which is considered to be date honey. In the book of First Kings, Solomon's kingdom is split up into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And the first northern king, Jeroboam, tries to get his people to worship golden calves so that instead of God, so that they don't go down to Jerusalem into the southern kingdom of Judah. And God doesn't like this. So as it turns out, Jeroboam's son is sick, and Jeroboam sends his wife to go ask the prophet who predicted that Jeroboam would become king what's going to happen to the boy. And Jeroboam tells his wife to take some loaves and a jug of honey, and the prophet will tell what's going to happen. Spoiler alert, the boy dies, but because he's the only one who was faithful to God in his family, he gets buried and everybody mourns for him, unlike the rest of Jeroboam's family. Second Kings, the king of Assyria is besieging Jerusalem, and he sends a messenger to talk to the people of Jerusalem and urge them to surrender. And he says, I'll take you to live in a place that's like your own land. It's got honey, just like your land has honey, and other things too that are mentioned. But the class is about honey. So, more instances of honey in the land of Israel. Then we have, fast forwarding from the Assyrians to the Babylonians in the book of Jeremiah now. The Babylonians destroy the temple, the first temple, and take away most of the Jews, but they appoint Gedaliah to be the governor in their stead for the people still remaining. And a guy named Ishmael doesn't like that Gedaliah has been working with the Babylonians to preserve Jewish self-government in any capacity. So Ishmael assassinates Gedaliah on the 3rd of Tishrei, which is why it's called Tzom Gedaliah, the Fast of Gedaliah. And then there are 2 days later, there's some people going to Jerusalem, and Ishmael's concerned they will discover that Gedaliah has been assassinated. So he kills most of them as well. But there are a few who say, don't kill us. We have some stores hidden in a field, stores of wheat, barley, oil, and honey. So he doesn't kill them. But more honey. Then we have Ezekiel, who is speaking on behalf of God, where God says that when God was betrothed to the Jewish people, God gave them wonderful products of the land of Israel, including honey. But then a few verses later, God says that the Jewish people took God's gifts and offered them to other gods. And so now God is mad. And it's all in a marital context here. Also in Ezekiel, we find out a key verse in the subject of honey, that Israel not only has honey, but it is an exporter of honey, because we find out that the land of Israel exports honey to the Phoenicians, who then have trade all across the Mediterranean. So honey from the land of Israel is going lots of places. We have quotes from the Song of Songs, not only about apples, but also about honey. We've got a line, honey and milk are under your tongue. This line is used to prove why you ought to have cheesecake on Shavuot. Using metaphors about this being about Torah. We also have, I have come to my garden, I've eaten my honey and honeycomb, drunk my wine and my milk, eat lovers and drink deep of love. And finally, about honey from Proverbs, if you find honey, eat only what you need, because if you have too much, that's not going to be so good. And in the last 2 minutes, we get to apples and honey. So here's the deal with apples and honey for Rosh Hashanah. In the Talmud, it says, if you eat certain foods, they are auspicious for a good year. Doesn't say anything about apples and honey. The Talmud is from about 500 CE. Fast forwarding to 1300 CE, we have the Torah, which is the forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch, which says that from this suggestion in the Talmud, there are various customs. For instance, in Germany, they are accustomed to eating sweet apple with honey at the beginning of the Rosh Hashanah meal to say, let this new year be sweet for us. And then it lists other customs in other places. This gets codified into the Shulchan Aruch in the Ashkenazi addition to it, the gloss from Moses Isserles. Some have a custom of eating a sweet apple and honey and saying, may sweet year be renewed on us, and this is what we do. There is so the order is you say the blessing for the apple, Borei Pri Eitz, you eat the apple, and then you say, Yehi Ratzon Elfenecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Ohev Oteinu shetechadesh Eloheinu shana tova u'metuka. May it be your will, our God and God of our ancestors, that we should have a good and sweet year. And then there is a Iraqi rabbi from the 1900s who says that you can also make meaningful statements, which are basically puns, in whatever language you understand. And because he said that, I have now given you a whole slew of puns that you can use yourselves that I came up with. And finally, we've got the American Jewish World Service mailing for this year talks about something else that you can say with apples and honey. And then I have videos of a Mexican version in Ladino of Tapuchi Mutvash, the Rosh Hashanah, a song about that. There's a Dip the Apple in the Honey. There's another song that's newer. And finally, there's a parody of Shakira's Waka Waka called Dip Your Apple by the Ein Parat Fountainheads, and you can view that as well. And it's 9 o'clock.
Okay.
So, going to stop the recording.